Good afternoon, Ways and Means. It is Wednesday, February 4th. We are continuing our work on property tax classifications and the implementation of that policy. We have some decisions to make. And Kirby is going to join us to talk about some of those decisions.
That's an invitation.
It was indeed, thank you.
Hey, Kirby Keaton, Legislative Council. We have a short presentation for you relating to one part of the language that I've shared before on the classifications, fleshing out the classifications framework from Act 73. There were questions about how exactly the language that we looked at would look like in the real world when it came to multi-use or mixed-use properties. So we'll just quickly look at some visuals to understand that better. The part of the language we're talking about is from subsection B of the classifications section. And numbers 1 and 2 is what we'll be applying. Everyone ready to learn? That's a green rectangle. And it represents in 2 dimensions a 30-acre parcel. That's why it's green, because it's very grassy. Okay? It's not in current use. What is it? Say that, and it's not a homestead, and because none of what I'm about to say would apply if that were the case. It's okay. Keep me on my toes. All right.
You're free to speak until you're recognized.
So we're starting with our 30-acre parcel. And then there's a house on it. A building anyway. And that building is, we'll say 2,000 square feet to keep it, to keep our number somewhat digestible. 1,500 of the square feet are a shop. Well, we often hear Jake use an example of a commercial building with short-term rental over it when he's talked about the
By shop, do you mean like a mechanical shop or like a store?
any shop you want.
Okay.
Anything that would be a commercial property. So I don't know, do you guys have a preferred?
No, I'd like a bakery.
A bakery. Got it. We got a bakery.
Home bakery?
Commercial.
This is not a home bakery. There's no homestead involved. This is a bakery that has 500 square feet above it that it uses as a short-term rental to supplement the bakery. Okay. The blue part is the short-term rental. This is the colors represent the proportion of the square footage used. It's not necessarily laid out that way. But we're going to say 500 square feet is the short-term rental. That would be 25%. That's the blue square. And the orange square there is the bakery, which is 75% of the building that's used for a non-homestead, non-residential purpose. And in the short-term rental, 25% of that would be a non-homestead residential. So that building would be taxed under the language we have as follows. 75% of the value would be taxed using the non-homestead, non-residential rate. And 25% of the value of the building would be taxed as non-homestead residential rate. So a higher rate for the portion that's used for the short-term rental.
Assuming we have a higher rate for that category.
Yes, I'm always going to presume that, and part of the reason why I feel like I can safely presume that is that one of the contingencies in Act 73 is that you have to change that rate. So I'm just going to go ahead and assume that contingency is met and that that rate will be increased. So there's the building. What do we do about the land?
What do we do about the land?
And that's the whole point of all this, right?
Mhm.
This is what we do. We turn that green,
Yeah, are we paving the parking, we're
just paving it,
paving it?
the bakery is just hugely expanded. No, the orange, it's still grass, don't worry. But the orange part, 75% of that, of the underlying land would be classified and taxed, just like the bakery, as non-homestead, non-residential, and 25% of that underlying land on that parcel would be classified and taxed as non-homestead residential. So 25% of the value of the underlying land, which would be on the grand list, would be taxed higher because of the presence of that short-term rental in the building part. That is the language we have. This is, reminder, a policy decision that you're in the process of making. This is not the only way to deal with the underlying land issue. It's just a way that's in there right now.
So what I see there is sort of an assumption that the land should be taxed at sort of the same assumptions as how the building is being used,
Yes, and the assumption.
without regard to how the land is used.
Mhm. Yes, because if you go this approach, it's acknowledging that it's very difficult to dissect how land is used related to a building.
And we already have a system for that, to dissect how a land is used. Called current use.
Current use is one way that the law does that. Yeah. It just becomes much more problematic when you start to talk about how the land is associated with the building. And I don't think anyone would propose that it's feasible to actually learn how every square foot of land is used in Vermont, right? Especially with, you're going to have this multi-use purpose come up a whole lot. So finding a way that you think policy-wise is fair, equitable, administratable, that's what you're looking into. There's a question here.
Representative Odie.
Thank you. So even though in this illustration, the orange is one part and the blue is another part, you aren't going to have people be able to say, I want you to look at just this 25% of my land, and I choose this to be taxed one way. It's just
Of the total value.
of the
The
total.
total value of the underlying land would be split up. It wouldn't be under the language that we have right now, there wouldn't be any attempt to assign more valuable portions to certain uses or anything like that. Nothing like that.
So let me throw a wrench into the works. Let's say that there's a one-car garage on that property. It's only used for folks that use the Airbnb. Okay, how are the listers gonna know that? Is that through that attestation? And then that'll be that one-car garage will be assessed at the non-homestead residential rate, correct?
Yeah, that's how this is being envisioned. There's two parts. The way it's being envisioned, relying largely off of the tax department's report and what they envision. There's two steps to identifying how properties will be used. The first will involve the assessing officials in identifying number of dwelling units is the big one. In this case, there would be one dwelling unit to be that short-term rental. And then the attestation, once the dwelling units are identified, the information that's gathered on the grand list about number of dwelling units could be compared with that attestation, dwelling unit attestation, where that is where the actual square footage use of things will be given. So no, it wouldn't be all on the assessing officials to figure out questions like that, like percentage of square footage use. That would be more on the property owner with presumably the Department of Taxes having an ability to also look into the truthfulness of that, of what's being reported. That's the vision that we have right now. Yeah.
Thanks.
Representative.
Thank you. So it would be on the value of the whole thing that you separated. You don't go in and look at the 25% and say, well, the finishes in this are very beautiful, they're flooring.
That's if I'm understanding your question correctly, that is a way to think about it. If you follow this approach, where the land and the building follow the same proportionality, then you don't even need to break out the value of the land versus the land of the building. You could just say the total value of the parcel and say 75-25 in this case.
Just the total value, total parcel with everything on it, 75.
Yep. If I think one thing you're touching on, which is an interesting point, is that perhaps this short-term rental is renovated really well and the bakery's in a really bad shape. Yes, maybe the value of the short-term rental could indirectly affect the tax paid by the bakery, or paid for the bakery part. Was that a relationship you were pointing out?
Yeah, no, I was thinking, what would a taxpayer be incentivized to do? To pay the least amount of taxes, because people might want to do that.
The thing that they would be the best thing they could do is turn that short-term rental into a homestead. They would save a ton in taxes by doing that. Well, feasibly, we don't know the numbers, so I shouldn't say that.
So one question, I want to ask you a question about this, and also, Sorcha, can you make sure that Jake knows whenever we're working on this so that he can hang out and spitball with us? Thank you. So one scenario I could see is that sort of the underlying land is always, say, non-homestead, non-residential. But what I could see that if there's just one little thing that's non-homestead, non-residential, but what I could see that turning into is you have, an enormous, $50 million estate that's a second home. Someone puts a little shop at the end of the driveway, and that allows, the 100 acres to all be non-residential. And so that's why this proportionality, like that sort of negative incentive helps me move closer to what this feels imperfect to me, but it feels more perfect than that scenario that I just laid out. I don't know if that made sense.
Almost. If you can just say it again.
I can't
All
ever
right.
say it again. Not like because of anything about you. I just forget what I say after I say it.
It just, no matter what, how beautiful the 25% thing is. And how much of a wreck the other is, or how beautiful the commercial.
It's the same owners.
It's the property is valued
It's just
completely.
valued for the total value of the property. And that's what you mean, and that's what we would be voting on if we took this language. We don't care about the detail, this is what it is.
Yeah, and all of this goes to the tax rate used.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we're not changing valuation practices here. We're just talking about.
How you value the total buildings and land and then divide it by percentage. That's it.
Well, so I want to rephrase that. So the valuation happens totally separate from this legislation.
Yeah.
We're just talking about how to apportion taxation on land that has already been valued.
Sure, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we're not apportioning value or apportioning tax. Okay. Obviously, they're related to each other.
What do you think?
But it's the same on the building too. What you're saying is regardless, let's say it is a mansion of a Airbnb and it's a little bit of a bakery. When we assess that, it's going to be one value. But in the end, it's going to be that percentage used for that total value.
Mhm.
So I think you mentioned it, that the bakery could take the hit because that's such a great Airbnb.
I think also in that example, you could argue that the Airbnbs getting away with something in that only 25% of the value of the entire property is having the higher tax rate when it's actually the valuable part.
I think we should talk more about that, because then,
Well, wait.
oh. I think we talk more about that, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I want to make sure that Representative Higley
I'm
and
sorry.
Kirby finish.
Good, yeah, I think so.
Okay,
Because
yes.
then. So now you have a beautiful short-term rental, that's a gorgeous mansion. And then, actually, it's a beautiful time. And then you think, if I could only have less they pay in taxes, I'll put up a crummy shed and attach it to this very adorable, beautifully finished, short-term rental. And that will bring down the value of the whole thing.
And not in that example, it would have to be
Good
a,
example that I almost thought of and now I've lost.
it would have to be something that would fall under non-homestead, non-residential.
Non-homestead, non-residential, that's a bakery, counts a bakery. But it's a really crummy. You know,
And so
you
again,
purposely put up a very low value bakery.
so that would be about lowering the overall value of the land.
Yes.
And that is a question for sort of our valuation appraisal assessor universe, not this.
Okay.
And it's possible that, people don't put siding on the fronts of their houses, for instance. But then those people have to live without siding on the fronts of their houses and their heat costs go up. Maybe their neighbors judge them, who knows?
I was just trying to figure out a way that people would work in their own self-interest to make a choice that would have them pay less than they might otherwise.
Game necessity.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, everyone will always look at what the rules are and say, well, how can I deal with that?
Does anyone have a better idea for how to do this than this idea? Do you want to show the second slide?
Mhm.
Do you have another slide after this?
No, I don't have any other slides about any other, I could float, I don't know if it's helpful, float other.
Well, let's see if does anyone have other than Kirby, have an idea for another way to do this?
I thought of a few things, but they just I started going down rabbit hole, and they all just got so complicated so quickly that.
Yeah.
There was a loss of simplicity and equity at any time I tried to, I was playing around with what if we just looked at the land underneath the actual structure and then hold the rest of the land harmless? Or just go to divert to the rest of the land being the lower of the two other non-homestead categories, and it just spirals very quickly.
Yeah, Representative.
I think it's just hard to accept also that there's no system that's perfect.
Right.
Maybe it's the hardest thing for some of us about being a legislator or being alive. Yes, Representative Wassenbeck.
Can I float something about
Agreed.
terminology? Or we just focus on the percentage?
Let's focus on percentage for now to just attempt to finish thoughts. Okay. Kirby, do you have ideas of?
Oh, this obviously I'm not proposing anything. I just think if just to help you understand this, you need something to compare it to, right? Depending on your policy motivations, I think, or a lot of that just hinted at this, you could say that the underlying land is one or the other, depending on the policy decision you make. For instance, if you really would like to try to dissuade any short-term rentals or second homes, you could say all the underlying land is going to be taxed at that higher rate if that's present in the buildings. You could also do the flip side and try to be more lenient and call it non-homestead, non-residential always. You could also split it 50-50 as a very imprecise way to just make it simple.
I remember some version of this bill, and there were of the legislation that went into Act, the language that went into Act 73, and there were so many versions of that. If everyone remembers, we had sort of a like a decision tree that if you were in this category, you stayed in this category, but if you also had this category, then you would move to that one. And that's sort of what I hear you describing, that like sort of one status has preeminence. Is that the word I want? over the others?
Like this way.
Okay.
So just.
Yeah.
From a, I know we're not talking about valuation, but in the process of valuation, I mean, the lister or assessor is going to say under the site is worth X amount, and then each component of the building is worth a different amount. So you already have it broken out from an appraisal standpoint as to what the value is of the Airbnb and of the bakery or warehouse, whatever you want to call it. So you've already got it broken out.
I'm not sure if it's going to universally be reported that way, but
I think of building the valuation and the lister cards I've seen anyway, that has it that way. But
I would definitely defer to Paula or district advisor to TDR or something on that.
Yeah, but somebody.
I'm wondering how insurance plays a role. So you go to insure the property and I don't mean to buy insurance on land, but you have to buy insurance on could be replacement value, whatever. I just wonder if insurance is thrown out there, what do you think? Well, you're,
About insurance.
yeah, like
About the
you think
insurance
that's
business
play
side.
into it or?
Wouldn't know on that.
There's the place where I'm aware when it comes to valuation and the grand list, when it comes to insurance replacement value, is that there is part of our law that for exempt properties that don't have a value, that it's acceptable to use the insurance replacement value as a sort of proxy. But that's just so that there's not a zero on the grand list.
And we can take testimony from the insurance association. I imagine that the information that people report to their insurance agency is confidential, like a confidential business relationship. But we can ask.
Yeah, just there's been a piece of this, my observation over the last couple of years, the insurance replacement values are frequently higher than assessed values. So if people want to go that way, fine, but more taxes.
We can, yeah, take testimony on that, and
Yeah.
as assessments catch up.
I'll get to it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I hear that this feels like fairly good placeholder, best case scenario for people. Okay, so
There's a few end notes, if that's okay.
love an end note.
Things to keep in mind. I'm gonna add one more to this, but the acreage does not matter under this method, so I think that's a confusing aspect perhaps, because in some places we care about acreage. For this, what we're doing, the acreage is irrelevant. This treatment is another note. This treatment only applies to multi-use or mixed-use parcels without a homestead. So as a reminder, if this blue were instead of an STR a homestead, then all that land, surrounding land would be blue too. It would all be taxed as a homestead. And that's how it is under current law. And that's how things are under the language that's under consideration now. And then for parcels with a homestead, like I just said, all the underlying land would be taxed as a homestead. I also want to remind that I started this thought last time and I didn't really finish it, but when it comes to non-homestead, non-residential, there is talk in the tax department report about that name. The things that fall into that, so you're aware, could be vacant land, could be parking lots, could be commercial, could be factories, could be long-term apartment buildings. So when considering, if you are thinking about those names, keep that in mind and keep in mind that this is a catch-all and that probably the most accurate name for that would be non-homestead other, because there's no word that captures all those different things I just said.
Okay, Bob.
Yes.
What if since it's no limit on the acreage, and you want to, let's say you want to avoid the tax treatment, but you don't want to turn it into your homestead, would you be incentivized to subdivide your land?
I don't know if that's a question for Kirby.
Yeah, no, but.
Yeah.
I thought I could shoot it to him. He could say, we have to have somebody in for. Or like.
Yeah, I would wanna look at that, but I'm not sure that would help. Because contiguous owners of a parcel are valued and taxed at the same parcel.
Right. Oh, yeah, then what if the person sells it off and then you have a development that's not really what you might. Like it's a gorgeous farmland and then in order to avoid the taxation of the wrong. Not farmland, but it's a beautiful piece. And then you chop it off.
The part that you would wanna chop off would be a second home or a short-term rental.
Yeah, but let's just say, whatever. My point is, you'd be possibly having a divided parcel. That maybe you don't really want to have that divided parcel right there.
Who doesn't want there to be a divided parcel?
Well,
I mean, the person who divided it probably wants it divided because they divided it.
yeah, so it's all about land use planning.
Okay, thank you. I just had no idea where you were going.
That's where I'm going.
Okay.
So are we going to further slice up land in Vermont? We do this.
Well, I don't know. That's a good
I don't
question.
know.
think we can control what people choose to do.
What we do through action.
That's not 250.
That's a lot. I think we should here.
So we, in order to have this, well, because today's just been complicated enough already, we've decided to make it more complicated. By we, I mean Charlie. So let's see how this goes. I'm really excited.
Okay, put your card, any card, that's yours. All right, so we have flashcards. We're gonna take different scenarios and try to figure out is it non-homestead, other, homestead, residential, and Kirby's gonna be the person that's on this. If we got it right. Okay. On the other side of the card is a description of a property and potential use. This is meant to be engaging and interesting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, oh, I know the answer. That's.
All right.
Kudos to you.
All right, so I'm gonna go first and I'll go clockwise. Sound good? All right, I have a general store with an apartment upstairs that is A, leased for 1 year to a full-time resident. B, occupied by the owner, or C, rented on a short-term basis via Airbnb. So I'm thinking leased for 1 year to a full-time resident, I'd have commercial downstairs, non-homestead other, and leased for 1 year would also be non-homestead other upstairs. Did I get that right?
Yes, it's not mixed use under this.
Right. Occupied by the owner, like upstairs would be non-homestead residential and downstairs would be non-homestead other. Or homestead residential, sorry. Right, makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
And last is rented on a short-term basis via Airbnb, the apartment upstairs, thinking that's non-homestead residential and downstairs is still non-homestead other.
It's the example we just looked at.
Yes, nailed it. Okay, go ahead.
You had time to think of it.
I have a year-round house used as a seasonal vacation home. And this would be non-homestead residential.
I have a seasonal hunting camp. Not insulated, no running water. This would be non-homestead.
Non-residential.
Residential.
Other.
Other,
Say it again, Joe, please.
Yes.
a seasonal hunting camp, not insulated, no running water.
It's not. Never running.
Yeah, I think you're right. Non-homestead, non-residential. If you want to get legally specific about it, that's not a dwelling under the language we're looking at.
Let's send to Kirby.
That's not a dwelling on the language we're looking at. The seasonal aspect means it's not a dwelling. Not being a dwelling means it's basically a non-residential property under like the way this is written.
Very important.
Well, wait a minute.
Can you say that one more time?
Basically, he just described a seasonal property that was definitely seasonal. It's not.
Can you bring up the language that you used last time you were here that outlined the dwelling stuff? And then as we go around the circle, we can point to the language.
What we're talking about right now,
Quick,
I had it.
I know.
Reading it.
whatever. Take some credit.
I mean, I knew where to look. So the part of the definition of dwelling excludes any properties that are not fit for or year-round habitation. And the definition of non-homestead residential relies on the property having a dwelling. So if you have no dwelling, there's no way it can be a non-homestead residential, which means if it's not claimed as a homestead, it defaults as non-homestead, non-residential.
So a camp is always non-homestead, non-residential.
Yes.
Yes.
If somebody moves into that camp, it
Mhm.
can now be considered a dwelling, correct?
That partly depends on the part of this that's it's fit for year-round habitation as determined by the commissioner. So some of that's up in the air. It's plausible, maybe not probable, but plausible that the Department of Taxes would issue rules around this and say that there's a presumption that it's fit for year-round habitation if it's being used for year-round habitation. Maybe they say something like that, in which case that changes things, what you're saying. But maybe they don't do that. Maybe that's just an instance of people living somewhere that's not considered a dwelling.
So again, that goes to my point of the number of houses that I know
Mhm.
that are like what Bill just described, that people move into. And it needs to be considered a dwelling for tax purposes. They need to have, a homestead now. And maybe that's,
Can something not be considered a dwelling and be a homestead?
that's the point.
And so I,
Yeah, I mean, under our current law, we don't rely on this dwelling.
and we're not changing homestead definition.
We're not changing homestead
So I
definition.
think that, I guess I'd ask you, Representative Higley, if you want further clarifying language in there to work with Kirby to get it drafted, because it almost works, but it could just be crisper.
Again, I think it's up to the commissioner of
Yeah,
access to.
yeah, but if we want it to be not up to the commissioner. then-
Yeah, one thing that I would add, and this is like going to what the chair's saying, is that if in your scenario, the people live there year round, then they would presumably declare that as a homestead. They would have to,
Right.
and it would be a homestead. And so that we wouldn't go into any of these other questions.
Okay, so even prior, it was considered non-homestead under the taxation proposal. Once they moved in there, it would be a homestead, regardless of the dwelling. classification. Okay, yeah, I think
Does that feel crisp enough? Okay, cool.
I mean, it could be a tub. I mean, it could be
Yeah.
something that I wouldn't want to live in, right? Or any of us here probably.
Yeah.
But it would be considered homestead.
Because it's year round.
Because you're living in it year round. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Representative Burkhart.
Yes, a house that operates a daycare in the same space as the residence.
Ooh, good one.
That's a good one.
We used this one last year.
I think that this is a mixed use and it is part homestead and part non-homestead, non-residential.
Which parts?
How well do you know the language from Act 73? This was part of it. How do we deal with when the same space is used for two purposes?
Is it apportioned based on how long the space is, like the amount of time? I don't remember the exact
Yes.
language.
Great answer.
Oh my God.
Go down to, of course, subsection D, subdivision 5. The portion of the floor space is
Talk on the side that people listening at home can't hear anything that's happening.
So this is language what's in Act 73. I'll note the current law does not deal with this. This is a known problem in current law, okay? But there's an attempt to resolve the issue here by saying if a portion of floor space is used for more than one purpose, the use in which the floor space is most often used shall be considered the primary use. It's going to be how the person declares how they use it. There's not much, aside from having government cameras in people's houses or whatever, that's just what we've got. So people would declare what they use it for.
Unless it's a daycare from like 7 in the morning till 8 at night.
This is a 24-hour daycare. And then eyebrows.
You know, so it's never gonna be a majority of the time. Be rarely. Anyway.
Representative Whitty?
I've gotten myself confused. An RV or motorhome parked on leased land and used seasonally by the owner. Well, it is not a dwelling. And I guess it's non-homestead residential.
Mm-mm.
Non-homestead. That's the, I haven't figured that out yet.
If it is indeed real property, which I think is actually a question. If it is indeed real property, then
We
it
need
was
a technical term, real property.
technical legal term, real property as opposed to personal property.
It does look like personal property.
So there's a chance that it's personal property and it would not be taxed as real property, would not be subject to property taxes. The underlying land would be because it's real property. But assuming that it is deemed to be real property, then it would be non-homestead, non-residential. This language excludes mobile homes from ever being considered dwellings or non-homestead residential. That could still be claimed, if it's real property, it could be claimed as a homestead.
And one thing that we should be careful, and remember, if something can be not a dwelling and then become a homestead, right? And we just covered that. One thing we want to be careful of is as a bill on manufactured housing and trailers and mobile homes comes over from House General that Representative Wozniak is tracking carefully, then we want to make sure that we're not messing up our things. And are you on that bill at all?
I've been a consultant on that bill a little bit.
Okay.
We
don't have to solve that now. I just want to make sure that we're like flagging it as a thing to worry about.
And we're not trying to tie the definition of mobile home here to a statutory definition as it exists. That is something to also maybe eventually you'll want to do that just for clarity's sake, rather than leaving it completely up to the department's interpretation to understand that. We're not tying, when the word mobile home is used here, it may or may not have the same meaning as when it's used elsewhere in statute. But if we wanted to have the same exact meaning, we can incorporate by reference those other definitions.
That's
But just to be clear, there's a difference between what's on the card and what we're talking about, because a mobile home is one thing, a motor home, in my mind, is an RV. A mobile home,
Yes.
the new term for that really is manufactured home, and people are going away from the term mobile home because they're not really mobile. This specifically says an RV or a motor home, which to me means another term for an RV or something that actually is on wheels and moves around and.
Except strangely, yes, and thank you on the close reading there. And I think there's a couple towns in the state that do a different thing with their grand list with regard to motor homes and real property.
I don't want to muddy things too much, but you could take the thing you're talking about, take the wheels off, put a foundation around it. At some point, it becomes real property. So, it's not. It's complex a little bit.
Representative Conlon sponsored a bill about it like 12 times, and then I really don't remember why nothing ever happened to it. Representative Holcomb, you're up.
a manufactured home affixed to a foundation or slab used by the owner as a seasonal property. I read this as a dwelling, so it would be non-homestead residential. Because it has become attached to a slab, so it's a permanent installation, even if they're choosing to use it as seasonal, it is a dwelling.
Your analysis is good, but there's one trick.
That's
Fair.
Uh-oh. Yes.
This language specifically leaves mobile homes out of non-homestead residential.
But this doesn't say mobile home, it says manufactured, so it could be Huntington Homes.
Manufactured home is the same as mobile home, but we're transitioning to better linked to using manufactured home.
So I think this is the difference between those two.
I think that we need to do some work.
And dwelling.
I think, well, or making clear what this means is, it's starting to be a little theme.
Okay.
But I don't want to name company names, but
No, yeah.
but the manufactured homes, like this is the faster, lower cost alternative to sticks and bricks. Like, I don't think this is, I think we need to define what.
Yeah, no, that's very much a home and
Yeah.
I think what the sort of individual, yes, yes,
Which is
okay.
why I was
We're gonna get there.
Representative Bernhardt's digression.
Yes.
Because I was right there with you.
It was, yeah.
Just on that note, though, if, again, we should probably get into it, but manufactured home, it could be a very elegant.
That's my
Yes,
point.
exactly.
Yes.
That's, you and I agree on that.
Okay, good.
Yes.
All right,
There's the danger of just transferring the title mobile home to
Yes.
manufactured home, because that's a huge category.
We are right there with you.
thanks.
Okay.
The policy decision there, you
Yep.
distinguish those types of manufactured homes.
Representative Wozniak.
An easy one. Shopping mall with a parking garage, non-homestead other.
Nice work.
Yeah, you gave it.
Representative
I
Higley.
think I have an easy one too. It's 100 acres of forest land that is undeveloped. That would be non-homestead, non-residential.
Great.
Mine's easy too. It says, commercial building, housing equipment to be a support of a network for telephone internet services.
You choose who was getting these?
No.
That's impressive.
Residential.
There's a trick question, actually.
Okay, well, I think it's non-residential, except for the squirrels.
Did I miss a fact?
No, but we just established that there's a separate appraisal process for communication technology.
That's right.
Yeah.
But what's that to do with the tax rate?
Probably nothing.
Trick yourself.
So good of a trick.
Go through its process.
Representative Brannigan.
Does that work for those whirly gigs too, windmills?
Really.
For utilities, right, yeah.
Okay, so mine, I don't know if mine is easy or hard, we'll see. Year-round house with 4 outbuildings to support an agricultural business. And a seasonal cabin emerges from a revised building. That's what it says. So year-round house is a homestead. Okay, so is all the land. The seasonal cabin that they're renting out as, it says as an Airbnb, that's non-residents, right?
I think so, non-homestead, residential,
Do you think you also have a commercial property in there? Is that what you were trying to say?
it's a farm.
Okay.
So there's 3 more buildings. The other 3 buildings, I think, are non-residential other.
I think they're.
What's on the backside?
That's my scribbling.
Oh.
Question is for the cabin.
Hmm.
If it's not a dwelling, because it's not meant for seasonal or year-round habitation.
Yeah.
So at that point, what is it? And it's just, off on a corner of a 50-acre lot.
Hmm.
So I think,
Non-homestead.
It's non-homestead, non-residential, because it's not a dwelling. And you've pointed out a possible loophole, if you want to call it that, that there would be some short-term rentals that would not be taxed as short-term or as non-homestead residential if they're seasonal short-term rentals.
So so there's a question, does anyone on the committee want to do anything to further clarify that? Right now, if something is a seasonal cabin, regardless of how it's used, unless someone's living in it full time, it would be non-homestead, non-residential.
Unless it's their primary residence.
Yes, which
Yeah,
I said that, yep. So is anyone interested in clarifying that further? That feels perfectly fine to me.
About it.
Yes,
If by clarifying further, you mean more classifications?
Yes.
Yes, I continue to believe we should have more classifications than just these three categories, but I understand that that is not where we are in this moment.
but you wouldn't want to offer clarifying language to move that particular property into the definition of a dwelling so that it could become a second home, right?
Without word, I don't know how we could.
Okay,
So-
great. Okay.
Can we think about it?
Yeah, folks can think about that if they want.
So if someone lived in there for 6 months or 8 months, would it be a dwelling? Is it related at all to how long?
Let's ask Kirby and have him pull up that language.
If I'm understanding the question, we're talking about
Mhm.
seasonal, how we're identifying seasonal dwellings. So the language we have says is fit for year-round habitation as determined by the commissioner. So, fit for year-round habitation would go to details about the property itself, not about how it's used.
So this says seasonal cabin revised from an Airbnb.
Mhm. So it would not be a dwelling. I'm going to interpret seasonal cabin to mean it's lacking either weatherization or plumbing or so if it's not fit for habitation, it can't be classified as non-homestead residential.
And the other outbuildings, the 3 outbuildings that are sort of not described at all. Those are non-homestead other, right?
You know, a lot of this question is showing you how much individual facts really matter. So I have to make some assumptions. It sounded like they were trying to describe that there is a working farm operation and those buildings are part of that farm operation, which is a commercial use. Because obviously part of this fact pattern was not that it was enrolled in current use, right? Because that would change everything.
Didn't say anything about current use, but I bet it is.
And then even within,
I think there's a lot of properties in this area that are not current use, even though they could be current use, right?
Right.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that happens. People don't enroll, even though they could.
And is it a hobby farm or a farm as designated in law?
Okay.
And again, we have a homestead here. So there's a reason for the property owner to want to argue those outbuildings are part of the homestead, not commercial.
Representative Page.
That would
Thank
be
you.
homestead residential, those 3 outbuildings.
So it sounds like, although very fact specific, the property that's used as the homestead and all of the underlying land, all of that is classified as homestead and taxed as homestead. The Airbnb or whatever, the short-term rental, is non-homestead, non-residential, just like now, how it would be. And then the outbuildings are non-homestead, non-residential. Essentially, that entire thing breaks down as current law. It would receive the same treatment as current law.
6-unit building rented to full-time residents, non-homestead residential.
Say that louder.
Could you-
6-unit building rented to full-time residents, non-homestead residential.
And
No, non-residential, non-homestead.
Long-term rentals, right?
Just, yeah, full-time, so it would be non-homestead, non-residential.
And maybe that question was meant to criticize the use of non-residential for apartments.
What I do in my head to make that work is I go, that's a commercial property, and then I move it into non-residential inside my head.
Which also reflects the report in which they use, tax department used 4 units as a cutoff.
People, normal people are gonna think it's residential, people live there all year round.
That's why some folks have been using other already.
Representative Wozniak, and then we're going to Representative Kimball, because we have 5 minutes left on this.
Yes, just on this point, this was one of the like ideas or thoughts that I jotted down when I was reading reports and stuff is we could just call it non-homestead A and non-homestead B.
That is a way that things are done in some places.
Yeah, I'm thinking of when we did some of the weights for the children with disabilities and rather than doing like high, middle, low, we did class A, class B. And I'm thinking that like the non-homestead, non-residential is so counterintuitive that I think just like removing all.
Counterpoint would be A and B tells someone like a member of the public nothing about it.
Right.
So
But I mean, I'm saying non-residential.
Three quickies, so it'll be easy. Single family dwelling owned by a resort occupied by employees as a benefit of employment month to month lease.
Did you say that?
It's a single family dwelling owned by a resort occupied by employees as a benefit of employees employment with a month to month lease.
So what do you think it is?
Well, it could be non-homestead. Non-residential has to be. It's an investment property, but
Yep.
2 unit year
Wait,
round.
does anyone want, that makes sense to me. Does anyone not want it to be in that?
Well, right after you say it, of course, it makes sense, but for anyone who's thinking what to call it, they're thinking people reside there. That's all.
So, but let's not get lost in the terminology and just make sure that we're actually classifying properties accurately. Yes,
It's part of their pay, part of what they're earning.
I don't know if that was
to
me.
work there.
It could be, it's a benefit.
actually, in that question, the employee aspect of it's a red herring. It just comes down to there's a long-term rental situation.
Except it's not long-term.
So if you change it so that there's not a long-term lease and the people are not paying to stay there, this is part of employment, then that's an open policy question for you right now, whether you want to categorically say that that is never a long-term or that is never a second home, short-term rental classification situation.
So 2 things. One, just because something is rented month to month does not mean it's not a long-term rental. Something can be rented month to month for 5 years straight, right?
Right.
And so it's the amount of months that the property is rented regardless of, right? So
It's on 30-day periods for a total of 6 months out of the year. Also, what's allowed under Vermont law, just a quick note, don't want to muddy things too much, but you can have a rental period less than 30 days under Vermont law. But because of this, going week to week would not count as a 30-day rental period under this. I'll just leave that out there.
And so does anyone want to sort of pick up the mantle of the employer provided housing
Yeah, we should
and tax classifications?
Yeah.
Are you going to do that? Thank you. Okay.
2 unit year round home, one occupied by full-time resident, the other rented on Airbnb.
Say it again.
It's your quiz. You have to answer.
2 unit year round home, one occupied by the full-time resident, the other rented on Airbnb. So I was thinking it was, if it's by square footage, it would be homestead residential and non-homestead residential.
Yes.
The other unit is
It's not like you're saying homestead.
homestead residential, half of it, whatever by by square feet.
One of them is just a homestead, right?
Homestead, yeah.
And then, yes, non-homestead, not residential.
Yeah.
The other part. And the underlying land would be,
Homestead.
all of it would be homestead.
All of it be homestead.
Mhm.
Yes, excellent. That's what we're doing.
So in a case like that, does homestead always rent out for the property, for the land?
The land, yes, it does. And also his example is 100% current law. That's what we would do under current law, except that, well, no, I'm sorry. The tax rate will be different.
Yeah. So 4 unit house with A, the owner occupies 1 unit and rents the others long-term. So 3 units, that would be homestead. And non-homestead, non-residential for the three.
Mhm. And that would be based off of square footage, but the underlying land would be 100%. Yes.
Okay, and 2-unit home, no? Done.
Okay, I have only two takeaways from this particular piece of testimony. The definition of manufactured homes, mobile homes, caravans, campers, lines there, cleaner lines there, and employer-provided housing.
Yeah.
Representative Kimball, you're working on that employer-provided housing. Representative Holcomb, are you working on the other one?
Like, you mean the issue around manufacturing?
Yes. With Higley?
I don't
Okay.
feel like I have a lot of expertise, but happy to.
Can you two do it together and bring something back next time we take it up? Okay, thank you.
Sit in on that.
Okay. So with, gosh, that beeping's annoying. With that, thank you so much, Kirby. Next time we pick this up, we're gonna go through the legislative, we're gonna go through the language again, go through language and bring those two clarifications with us. So be ready for that next time. Cool. Which will be next week, right? Yes. Yeah. We'll figure that out. Okay.
And then we keep these as souvenirs.
No, because we're gonna give them to Jake.
Okay.
Oh. Give them back. Okay.
Mr. Donovan.
Great. He may come in. We are gonna take a deep and spacious breath to transition our minds. We are picking up school construction now. And school debt. I just want to let the committee know, Mr. Donahue is here to join us to talk about sort of school construction, the process around guidelines for that, resources needed for that. He is not here to talk about any hopes for special funds or not special funds. That is a conversation for other people who are being scheduled right now. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. Great. Hello, thank you so much for joining us. Really good to see you.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yeah, thanks.
All right. Well, for the record, Bob Donahue, in the capacity of School Facilities Program Manager with the Agency of Education. And today I was just asked to speak to you all about some issues around facilities, school construction. And I thought I'd start off with a brief history of how we got to where we are right now. I'm sure
We
you all
love that, thank you.
Okay, I'm sure you're familiar with parts and pieces of it, but basically I only came on just shy of 3 years ago. And at that time, Act 72 of 2021 had required the Agency of Education to institute a statewide facilities assessment of the school buildings portfolio across the state. We finished that field work in the end of 2023, and that generated a bunch of data for the schools to use planning capital replacements going forward, but it also informed the legislature of the magnitude of the need of the deteriorating facilities across the state due to the lack of capital investment from the suspension of the school construction program in 2007. So since 2007, there's been no school construction aid program. And because of that, in the intervening years, I've just seen an increase in the deterioration of the school buildings. Coincident with the ending of the school facilities assessment, we took all that data and created a facilities dashboard so that the public and anybody who's interested can take a look at the school facility assessment dashboard to get an insight into their particular schools, their particular district, and to do comparisons across districts if they chose to. Then out of the work that came from that, Act 78 of 2023 created the School Construction Aid Task Force. And that task force took a deeper dive into the findings of the school facilities assessments. And after quite a few meetings, they ended up generating a report that had some recommendations going forward regarding school facility construction and legislation that might enable the reinstatement of a new school construction program. Subsequent to that, there was Act 149 of 2024, and that created a legislative working group that then the outcome of their work over that summer of 2024 really was the basic framework of the school construction section of Act 73 of 2025. And that's what currently is the state of the construction section in Act 73. So that's the really compressed timeline to where we got to where we are now. I guess there's a lot to talk about in a short period of time. So after the facilities assessment work is laid out, really what came to play is how are we going to go about not just funding school construction, but what are the ways that schools are going to come into a construction program, and what are the eligibility requirements to get that construction aid? And I think much of the language that was in prior legislation around school construction was carried over. But I think one of the major pieces that's different that I think is really relevant to the context of the environment we're talking about, schools and fewer districts, is the facilities master plan. There was a grant established for the facilities master planning, and it's really the mechanism that schools can really drill deeply down into what are their educational visions for the school district, take a look at where they are compared to that vision, and then doing a gap analysis that says we're not where we want to be from our instructional programming and service space areas. We take a look at what our facilities currently have, and then through a very robust community engagement, this facilities master planning that's usually led by an architectural engineering firm in conjunction with an educational visioning consultant. They pull together the community and the school leaders, and they come up with a viable set of solutions going forward that can have multiple options using the different school buildings. And really they come down to a conclusion that there's a few paths forward for the school district. And it may mean some schools have to be closed down, shuck the kids over to different schools because those schools may offer more programming space, service space, or maybe more inclined to an easier facility build and or renovation. So the facilities master planning grant that was created in legislation but remains unfunded is really going to be an important part in this new setting, particularly where school districts can start taking a look at a very detailed understanding of what their school facilities can provide them for the vision that they have for their educational programming going forward. And then in order to make all of this happen, we need to have a school construction division, which was enabled in Act 73, the creation of a school construction division within the Agency of Education. None of those positions have been hired, although all the position descriptions have been created. And in order to now develop the rules and regulations, a new school construction planning guide, develop the new educational specifications that kind of define what are the minimum requirements for space for the various educational service and programming areas. All of that still has to be created, and we would need a group of people solely focused in a construction division team to be creating all of those rules and regulations such that when the monies are made available, we would be ready to run with actually allowing applications to come in for school construction aid. So we could go on so much more because there's so much in between all those three major highlights, but we conducted a facilities assessment. Out of that facilities assessment came some really robust ideas from the legislative working group and from the task force to help inform the school construction wording in Act 73 that currently exists.
Thanks. One piece that I've been thinking about lately, and I'd love your thoughts, is I know that facilities assessment was quite comprehensive and striking, right, in the state of many of our facilities around the state and what students are and school staff are working in and learning in. And the total cost attached to it was so large as to feel terrifying and unsolvable, which is not your fault. It's just sort of like that's the reality that we're working with here. And so I'm curious, and then sort of subsequent task forces and working groups and all the things you just described really laid out this vision for newer and fewer, right? And so I'm trying to think about, as we're sort of getting our heads around what funding school construction would look like, how to line up that facilities assessment with this vision of newer and fewer and like where the Venn diagram is of where we need to be spending money.
Yeah,
Sorry, that was an overly, it's like late, it's been a long day, so I'm sorry that question was so confusing.
no, I think I get the drift of it because I think
Okay.
we've all been struggling with, how to make sense of the massive need with not as many resources as we would like. I don't think there's a simple answer to it. And I can preface my following statements with this. The $6.2 billion over 20 years that the facilities assessment identified is actually lower than one would typically expect for the amount of work that still has to be done. And the reason I say this is it was a replacement in kind analysis. And so they didn't do anything to take a look at what it would be to modernize the schools, to turn them into the school settings that we are saying the 21st century educational school should look like. And the difference between the footprint of a school made in 1940, 50, 60 is going to be different than the footprint, say, of what a modern school that we envision going forward for 20 or 30 years would have. So there were elements of this facilities assessment that recommended further studies be done. A lot of the studies that further had to be done were all around the idea of ADA compliance and getting all the schools up to ADA compliance. Therefore, studies that did ADA compliance needs did not quantify what the actual construction cost would be to get schools ADA compliant. So there's a bunch of other embedded costs that are not captured through the facilities assessment. So 6.2 billion is even quite low. That said, what I addressed about the facilities master planning grant, I think is really key to moving forward, knowing the constraints of the fiscal constraints that exist. The facilities master plan is really a strategic vision going forward for newly created districts or existing districts, where they have to take the hard look at, do all of our facilities buildings meet the need of what we're envisioning for the future? And if they don't meet that need, perhaps the solution involves shuttering some of those schools, expanding other schools for a variety of criteria that the community decides makes sense for this particular community. So you may have 5 elementary, 2 middle, and 1 high school. And it may be that because of declining enrollment and the condition of certain of the facilities, you could get away with 3 elementary, 1 middle, or combine 3 elementary and then just do a middle high school. And the iterative process going through the facilities master planning program is you have all these discussions, you do a more detailed analysis of your facilities, and based upon all of that data, you come up with multiple solutions that are data-driven. And now the hard part of getting community buy-in through the emotional parts that are also part of this very important decision, right? It's very easy to take a look at transportation patterns and the like. It's very easy to go through and say, yeah, we need a new roof, new floor, a bigger gym, and we need more educational space and one-on-one space. That's the easy part. The hard part is getting buy-on that this solution, maybe one out of a multiple, is the best consensus we can reach, even though it doesn't make everybody happy for a variety of reasons. And all of that's understandable. So I think there's been several schools that have done this already through master planning. And I think it's a robust method that can make the decisions that have to be made as objective as possible. And then it's really just robust discussions involving the community so that they really understand we're not trying to drive a solution on anybody's against anybody's beliefs. It's just reviewing the facts and saying, these are the constraints we have to work with. Now, how do we make the best solution out of them?
So, Bob, this is Charlie Kimball. I talked to you a couple of years ago about the Mountain View School or Woodstock Union High School at that point in time when they said, hey, we received approval from the Agency of Education. I was like, approval for what? And it was for those eligible expenses when calculating the excess spending threshold more than anything else. So it wasn't necessarily green light, go ahead, go do it, you're going to get money. It was just limited to that. If I remember our conversation correctly, is that right?
Yeah, basically the preliminary application, at that time, when excess spending, when valid exemptions were included with excess spending, right? They subsequently were removed. But when there were valid excess spending exemptions, going through the preliminary application kind of validates, that the cost of construction meets the requirements, minimum requirements of the Agency of Education and the school construction planning guide as it existed when there was a construction program. And then that preliminary application approval basically lets them know that if there was state aid, it caps the aid at a certain dollar value, and they know that they are on the hook for the balance of the monies. But yes, at the time that you and I talked, I think excess spending exemptions had just recently been rescinded, and therefore, in the case for Woodstock, they were going to get a tax penalty because they were going to be over that excess spending threshold.
Thank you for that. I guess the reason why I was thinking about this was that it seems like a very long road from, if you look at the bill, to think about a new school construction division, rulemaking, prioritization, and all that stuff. However, and doing more research on the construction planning guide that already exists, pretty good detail. You've already gone through that process of approving different budgets based on, are they meeting the needs? And I imagine there are many rules already in process. So I'm thinking that you already have a body of work that you can easily turn on, if you will, if when the lights start to go green from yellow. Is that true without making a policy for the department? But I'm just trying to think of what resources you already have that are pretty well baked.
There are certainly existing rules that the State Board of Education has oversight over now, right? And Act 73 transfers the rulemaking over to the Agency of Education for those rules and regulations that would be developed. I think certain of the rules certainly could be just transferred. Others would want to be modified. I think the big area that needs to be modified would be that school construction planning guide, especially around the area of the educational specifications. So if you take a look at new schools that have been considered, even Woodstock, if you take a look at the Woodstock school plans, right, their square footage per student is higher than what's allowable, say, in the school construction planning guide specifications. And so there would have to be a review of the specifications to see what are current thoughts about minimum square footage per student. The thing to keep in mind with all of this, and we were just talking about this the other day, when we talk about modernizing schools to 21st century standards, and most schools are saying that they need more square footage because of a variety of valid changes since when the schools were first built, that increases the gross square footage footprint. And yet Vermont doesn't have any more money to deal with school construction. So the bigger that we make the school construction, the school footprint, it kind of creates a larger dollar value project. And therefore, with limited funding, each project then is consuming a larger amount. So educational specifications, again, if we were to divorce ourselves and said we had all the money in the world that we wanted to do something, we would all do something different than when we know we're constrained by cost. And so educationally, there may be some more ideal ideas about class size, physical class size, gross square footage for a class of 30 kids. Might be 750 square feet currently, but maybe new schools that are being built in Massachusetts are looking at 900 square feet. And that's wonderful, but if we can't even give financial aid for the 750, building the one that has a 900 square foot classroom becomes less, fewer schools to be built for the same amount of money. So it's I think there'll have to be some robust discussions as to what we're expecting. Do we want 21st century modern schools that are bigger in footprint and cost more? Or do we want to construct more schools that necessarily don't align with current modern school footprint sizes?
When I am looking at the testimony, sorry, read.
No,
Okay. I'm looking at the testimony you submitted and the construction aid eligibility considerations.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, what the line is between sort of that and those items to be considered by the secretary? And what rulemaking related to that would look like and what the status of that is?
I think the status of the rulemaking is whatever existing rules exist now are the rules that exist now. There's been no work to develop new rules yet. I think the school construction division would be the ones that would be really the architects of the rules, regulations, and school construction planning guide, because they're the ones who are going to be implementing that whole program. So I think to jumpstart a program quickly, I think the use of the old rules and regulations certainly could be considered. I don't know if I would fully endorse that because we're trying to create a whole new school construction program. And part of that might be, how do we streamline the process from preliminary application to final approval in such a way to deal with the growing number of schools that are facing, massive deterioration over time. So I think one of those things has to be a very, robust discussion about how do we streamline the whole process. And if the current rules and regulations could be improved in order to streamline that, I think that's a conversation worth having.
So are you I just want to make sure I'm understanding you. Are you recommending that that you all wait on rulemaking until those 5 positions that are recommended are stood up in the division?
I wouldn't be in a position to give a recommendation like that. I certainly have opinions, but I would defer that to Jill and Zoe.
Okay. And the construction aid eligibility considerations,
Mm-hmm.
can you help me better understand how those align or don't align with the existing rulemaking?
No, I think a great deal of these do align with the existing rulemaking. The big one that's different, and the big one that I think is really the rudder that's going to steer the direction of how school districts move forward, is the Facilities Master Planning Grant.
Okay.
I think that is the key. If you take a look at what, say, Woodstock did with their school construction process, it's incredible how much they did from a facilities assessment of their own, how much they did the visioning of their own. Same thing happened up in Winooski. Same thing's happening at Harwood Union, how they're taking a look at their various schools and which ones make sense to keep, which ones make sense to expand. So there are models of how to do it that are currently being done. Facilities Master Plan, to me, is really pivotal in moving forward, because as we talk about fewer school districts, you now have a larger number of school buildings in any given district. Not all the school buildings are worth investing in for a variety of reasons. And the Facilities Master Planning process is that process where you start to get to the narrow end of the funnel, where things that make sense start to fall through and the rest are held back because they just don't make sense. So I think the funding of the School Facilities Master Planning Grant is really a great way to jumpstart districts starting to take a look at their buildings and their visioning for their educational vision for the future.
And I'm going to keep on asking questions since someone else raised their hand. Okay. I'll ask the question. Okay. Are there any items that you think we're leaving out in this list that would be helpful in supporting the work to get done, including rulemaking, from all of the work that you've already done and the 3 task forces and 5 reports and all of the ways we've dug into this?
I don't think so. I think there's merit to having rules and regulations being developed concurrent with figuring out how we're going to fund school construction. Because in my mind, if we have all of the framework of how the program works and a flow chart that shows conception of an idea to do a school construction project to the final occupancy of it, if we can have the flow chart through the system already identified and what various sister agencies have to be involved for the review of it, whether it's the historic preservation, an Act 250 permit review, and all the other agencies that do get involved, to have all that mapped out ahead of time, such that when the monies become available, then we're just that further ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have several questions. One of them is the vision that there would be a resource at the level of the Agency of Education to provide technical assistance to districts as they are going through the master planning process? I mean, I come from a town where we have spent, I think now we're 18 years into master planning and visioning, quote unquote. We started literally as soon as school construction funding ended, and we've been through several rounds, and it's incredibly expensive. I mean, we're into the millions of dollars now that have been spent on various different consultants to sort of help with the process, quote unquote, help gather community input, help vision different options. And then, as you pointed out, then not getting them passed by the voters, they kind of go on the shelf until a couple years later, there's another energy because of, you know, one of the schools being completely over capacity and, you know, absolutely needing some help. So my concern is replicating that on a statewide level with various different districts, even if there are fewer of them, going through this process, spending a lot of money on different consultants, and then maybe not getting a project over the finish line. So what is the vision, and maybe you don't know, but what is the thought process behind how the state can provide help or assistance or some kind of shape to this process in different districts?
Yeah, I don't think this, I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for the state, but I don't see how the state could aid a community that goes through all that work and still declines to follow one of the recommendations going forward because of the costs or whatever the impact is to taxes and the like. So I don't know what the answer to that specifically would be. I just know that in my role as an engineer and facilities professional, my whole career, my job is to create the facts and the alternative solutions that are workable. And then what decision makers do, whether that's the public or senior leadership, that's in their hands. And how they lobby or can get support for that, I'm not sure how that all, I don't know what role specifically the state has in that. And again, maybe that would be something that would be more appropriate for Zoe and Jill.
And then I guess my follow-up question, and I'm not sure, Bob, if this is a question for you or if it's a question for us, is how, so the problem in our community has been that voters have not approved a project. How is that going to work in future state with a foundation formula? Because I know in Massachusetts, for example, the state provides a certain percentage of the cost of approved projects, and then the voters still have to go and vote to bond for the rest of it. And that they're set up differently in terms of their funding system. So that's more of like a district by district or town by town vote. Are we still envisioning if there would be district by district votes on school?
I think that's what we have to figure out. Like one sort of strong piece of reoccurring testimony in all the task forces is that the final debt for the overall debt for this can't be held at the state level. However, there are scenarios where it could be held at the district level, and yet the cost of that debt could be paid by the state. Could be 100% grant, could be a 30% grant. Like that's part of what needs to be figured out. And so I think there's a question of if the debt would need to be, for the debt to be held by the district, likely we would want to get testimony on if that would need to be voted by the district. My assumption is yes. And then in that scenario, would voters be more likely to approve debt if they know that the costs will, not increase their property taxes, right? So I think that's really part of what we need to figure out like this year together.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask a question, then other people, including you. Bob, in all of the work on this, has there been as we're sort of looking at the quality of the buildings, as well as the cost of the buildings, has there been a conversation about labor standards being applied to the construction?
Not specifically to the construction, no. You know, as part of the district quality standards, there was discussion about having certification for facilities managers that are then the stewards of the buildings after huge capital investment. And that was part of the DQS. Act 72 required capital improvement plans for all school districts so that we know that we're doing proper capital renewal for the monies that have been invested. So I think everybody's clearly understanding the link between appropriately budgeted maintenance budgets, which again are a challenge for school districts to pass because of their impact on taxes. But to invest a lot of money from a capital renewal perspective and then to let it deteriorate because the maintenance budget isn't at the level needed to maintain those capital dollars, that's a huge concern, right? So there was discussions through the various task force and working groups that perhaps there should be a requirement that school districts have to spend. There's an industry standard where your current replacement value of your building, you should be spending 3 to 4% of that on operations and maintenance expenses. So if school districts don't maintain what's just been capitally improved, we're just causing the same kind of deterioration over time. That is a big ask for school districts, you know, to have, when you take I did the numbers, I don't have them with me now, but there was only 2 school districts out of all the school districts. Let me say this, the SUs, SDs, out of the 52, there was only 2 that actually reached a 3% level of O&M budget compared to CRV. That's saying a lot, right? So if we start investing a lot of dollars in these schools, how do we get maintenance budgets to be elevated to the level that's appropriate to keep the capital equipment in good shape, right? So when we do capital investment, capital renewal, we ease the emergency reaction burden on maintenance forces because they have new equipment. And when we do appropriate maintenance, we preserve the length and longevity of the capital equipment that we just installed. So the two really have to be married together for success going forward with any kind of facilities maintenance.
So I have a few follow-up questions from that. So one, are you saying that is in the DQS now, or it needs to be added to the DQS? Because we're talking about reserve standards, and so that seems like a very relevant piece of all that.
That is not in the DQS specifically. DQS is looking at having an operations and maintenance manual for every building so that everyone's trained on what they should be doing and what their PM tasks are. DQS requires the 5-year capital improvement plan for districts. And DQS requires a facility manager certification for those who are delegated the responsibility of facilities. Just have somebody who's, you know, it's a lot to put a total school district facilities management, say on the longest serving custodian. They're fully competent in every area, right? But as more and more technical buildings are built, you need to have a certain level of proficiency in a variety of different crafts, right? Whether it's electrical, plumbing, mechanical, fire alarms, building access, right? So the demands on facilities managers grow every year, not just in schools, but in every industry sector. And so we need to make sure that we're trying to keep our staff in charge of facilities as credentialed as possible to stay current with the new equipment that's getting installed. So DQS requires CIP, the capital improvement plan, certification for the facilities managers, and then operations and maintenance manuals for all school buildings they're responsible for. It doesn't specifically address appropriate maintenance budgeting to meet the standards, but in the construction working group and task force, that was discussed as perhaps maybe being considered as an eligibility requirement for getting school construction aid. If you take a look at Rhode Island, they require it. They must maintain the 3% of the capital replacement value of their properties in order to get state funding.
Can you send us that language?
Yes.
Thank you. And then my other follow-up question related to that, and I'll go to Representative Odie and then Representative Maslin, is when I was asking about labor standards, I was more asking about labor standards for the folks doing the construction, the way federal dollars often have those labor standards attached to them.
Yes, I'm not familiar if we have any of that or ever had any of that. And it hasn't been a discussion point to date.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Representative Odie and then Maslin.
I'm wondering if anywhere in the country has the state own and take care of the buildings and together, you know, just decide what the buildings will look like.
White.
Okay, I think some of the audio was breaking up on me there. You're wondering if states own the buildings?
the states make the decision about where the buildings will be built. They're the ones who work with the stakeholders. They're the ones who put the building up. They're the ones who take care of the building.
I see. I could get back to you on that. I could do a research into that.
I mean, Hawaii has one district, so there, I would say.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Does the school district, who the one's district, take care of all the questions, or does the state just own that?
I don't know if
Yeah.
they're in, Hawaii. Representative Maslin.
That would take care of the question of, will, knowing that a good part, or maybe all of the building be paid for with state funds, then people would say yes to whatever. They won't if the state is running the whole thing.
I think it would bring up the challenge that all the debt would then sit at the state level, which is something that is not feasible with our existing debt capacity as a state.
You know, something that was brought up the other day in the School Construction Advisory Board meeting by Michael over at the Vermont Bond Bank was the idea of further investigating public-private partnerships for funding, getting people who are interested in investing in these sorts of projects and going through the bond bank in order to do it. And Michael had some encouraging words around that topic, and it might be worth hearing from him regarding public-private partnerships.
Lots of questions there. Yeah, thank you. Representative Maslin.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This has been fascinating discussion, and I'll try to look at the camera maybe and speak up so you can see me, hear me better. I had a discussion just a couple of days with regards to the idea of voluntary consolidation with regards to what the incentives might be. And it was suggested that school construction money may be a way to go, and letting us aside for the minute any discussion of where on earth the money would come from. All of this discussion has been very pertinent to reconstruction, new construction. And I'm just putting these things out as something for us to consider, because almost all your points, sir, have been pertinent to that sort of discussion. And I have written down a bunch of stuff that I hope to make use of shortly. But I would certainly offer that, see if I can wrap this up in a sentence or two. And I don't know if I can do it because we've gone in so many different directions. But there's a whole lot of stuff, rather than muddy it up, I'll just say there's a whole lot of stuff that you've brought up for us to consider that is absolutely pertinent to the discussion of new construction, old construction, reconstruction. And there's just, as you pointed out, some districts have done a whole lot of work, even if it is late, or excuse me, it's out of date, is very, very pertinent to that discussion. And we should make use of that to the extent that we can, because if a school district has done a school facility plan and it's fairly articulate, even if it's out of date, it's entirely relevant to this discussion. Entirely relevant. And that's something we need to draw on, build on. So thank you.
Yeah, I think just to touch on one of the points that you just surfaced was, you know, if schools looking to consolidate, what is it in there for them perhaps? Again, this is going to be part of the rules and regulations and the prioritization schema that we can develop for awarding construction aid. In other words, we may have 50 school districts that put their applications in the queue, but there's only so much money in any given year that can be doled out, right? How do we prioritize every year? Some of the discussions in the construction working group and the task force surrounded the idea of having a prioritization schema that considers such factors as you brought up in terms of 2 school districts looking to consolidate their schools. They get a higher rating on the prioritization schema because that consolidation helps in several ways, right? So again, just taking the old rules and regulations, it would be expeditious to do so, but it may not be the right thing to do so in our current context of very much constrained dollars with a large amount of need. And so maybe we have to be more creative in thinking, how do we want to reprioritize and to incentivize and award based on whatever those criteria are that we come up with. So I think there's a lot of fertile area that we can explore in terms of being creative, nimble, and fast tracking different ideas that can really, maybe motivate districts to do more than currently the old system would have allowed.
That's absolutely correct. Thank you very much.
And I think this conversation has happened hypothetically
Right.
with gosh, who knows where the revenue will ever come from, like hanging out here for a really extraordinarily too long time. And so like this year, we need to actually answer that question. Representative Kimball and then Holcomb and then Burkhart.
So Bob, one of the things that was helpful back in 2022, there was the voluntary facilities assessment that every school completed. And from that was a fairly consolidated list saying, best to worst type of thing in terms of the state of the conditions. And that was easy for some schools to point to and say, see, I'm number 11.
Yeah.
But in looking at some of those and talking to people, it was some of them were surprised by where they were on that list, and some weren't. So then looking at the more detailed reports from Bureau Veritas or
Yep.
how can I'm trying to use the tool and trying to have a way to say, show me the schools most in need of replacement, address, and I'm not sure how to do it. Do you have any suggestions for how we can use that tool, or is it even useful, or is its intent really to help with that facilities master planning, or really a comparison tool for us to say, these 10 districts are at most need?
Great question. Yeah. So that requires a bit more talk. So the whole idea of the facilities assessment that was initially done, that was called the facilities inventory. That was before I had joined. And that was really a self-reporting. In other words, they were sent a sheet. They gave BVTA the best information they knew of about their facility. So was the roof 40 years old or was the roof 20 years old? Was the plumbing original? Was the electrical infrastructure the original install, or was it upgraded? Based upon that self-reporting, it came up with your facility condition index score. Then when they went out to the field and did a bit more thorough investigation on some of those, they actually found that roofs, boilers, windows, doors, flooring had been replaced in the intervening time, and it was incorrect data from the original inventory. So the assessment then got further clarity on it, which then changed the FCI score for the various buildings associated with it. All that said, there's different levels of facilities assessments, just kind of like they usually call them facility level 1 through 5. And the more detailed you do your facilities assessment, the more accurate you get in what the actual dollar value in the facilities needs is. The level that the state of Vermont chose to do is a level 2, based upon the amount of money that could be appropriated to do the facilities assessment. And it was, I wouldn't say it was cursory, but it's not the level of detail that a pre-construction facilities assessment would generate. So like when Woodstock did their high school facilities assessment, that was a very detailed engineering review that's taking a look a lot more than what BVTA did on their walkthroughs. And if the point of contact person who really knew the building wasn't necessarily there for BVTA, they had to come to certain conclusions on their own as the field assessor. And some things were missed. And that's just the way it is when you're doing this kind of work. What this facilities assessment, in my opinion, gives, it gives a relative ranking of one building to the next, but the absolute value isn't necessarily something I would hang my hat on. So out of 289 school buildings assessed, it kind of says, here's the order of buildings in terms of deterioration. And that deterioration can be measured by the total dollar value that has to be done, or it could be measured about, different people would look at things differently. I tend to look at, there are a lot of old FCI fire alarm panels in school buildings, and they're obsolete. You can't get spare parts for them. The dollar value of them is relatively small, but the impact of the school operation is large, right? If we don't have a fire alarm system in a school building, the fire marshal could say, red tag the building, say you can't occupy it. So when people look at what's the state of a school and how should we look at it relative to another school, I think everybody uses different criteria. One could be just a total dollar value. What's the cost to get this school up to being safe, warm, and dry? Another one could look at some of the critical facility infrastructure systems like life safety systems, and they might say small dollar value, but large impact. So to answer your question, how do you use the tool? Facility condition index is something that everybody always talks about, but in the way that the school facilities assessment was conducted here, I think we have to take a bigger look and say, it gives us an idea of the magnitude that the state is facing from a dollar perspective, even though it's lowball. The 6.2 million, I can guarantee you, is much lower than what it's actually going to cost. So we now have to, this is why I keep coming back to facilities master planning, because that is where you do your detailed facilities analysis. And like was just observed in an earlier comment, these are expensive undertakings. And when you do these undertakings as a community, it would seem like there would be a commitment to, if we're going to do this, now we have to listen to what the findings are and move forward. Otherwise, it's kind of wasted money that's put on the shelf. And so I think there is no good answer when there's so many polarizing opinions as to how to solve this problem. Somebody is always unhappy. We know this. But all we can do is generate the factual data from which we can make those decisions and hopefully come to a consensus that nobody really loves, but everyone can get behind.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Representative Holcomb and then Burkhart? Is that what the order was? Okay.
It's like, had one what if, now I have three what ifs. And the first one actually came back to you, Representative Burkhart. And I wonder if we need a way to think bigger about how we provide support to regions. And I know there are other states that use education service agencies to support regional planning and regional support for construction development of the kind that you're talking about. And maybe it makes sense to hear from one of those regions or entities. I also wonder if we need to be pulling back from the board a bit because we're too small board when we're thinking about existing facilities and
Pulling back from the what?
pulling back from the board a bit. I wonder if
What board?
just
Oh, like the Medicaid board. Like, I was like, do you mean the state board? Do you mean the
Focusing on
school board? What board?
Sorry, focusing on trees and not the forest. And, you know, and I think of when I did a merger and we had to take some buildings offline, what we had to do was step back and not say, what do we have in place? What do we need to have in place? And what we don't have, and this is where the regional shared service entities could actually provide a useful role, is helping to facilitate and support those. And I think one of the most glaring examples that's sitting right in front of us is the current region, which has many high schools serving a region that used to be supported by one high school, and actually tried to add 300 seats to the region when they've lost, 5 small schools worth of kids in the last 20, 25 years. We need to step back and say, what is actually what we need here? Because it's actually not about fixing every school. I'm not sure any individual district can have that conversation without regional support. And I just have to say, I really, and especially given some of the other comments, we really have to be very.
Can you pause for 1 second to take a breath so we can because I just, that point you just made about, so there's the point about regional services being able to facilitate a lot of these tough discussions that I want to make sure that we sit with for a minute, because it's a great point. And then there's that second one about sort of, there's the all facilities model, and then there's the facilities that we need model. And I think that's another thing that I really hope that we sit with. Sorry.
That's all fine.
Okay, continue.
And then the third what if is, what are the consequences of the kinds of short-term incentives we create? And we do a lot of policy transition. I will tell you what I've heard from my region is people aren't investing in their buildings because they don't know if they're going to be their buildings.
Right.
Or because we're talking about a 3% tax cap and they're like, for 2 years, if I have to dial it back, this is one thing I can pass on for 3 years. And we have been doing that for 10 years. And so part of it is we are creating willful disinvestment, not because they're trying to manage to a very unstable environment right now. And I just have to say that to the extent that we keep creating short-term incentives and short-term penalties, we are actually incentivizing the exact behavior that we are trying to avoid. So.
Thanks. Representative Burkhart.
Wow,
That was a lot, and mine's not, definitely not as deep. My question for Bob is, are you at all concerned, this is a totally different topic, are you at all concerned about the number of construction companies and the size of our construction workforce in Vermont as a potential bottleneck to this whole process of school construction? Because I know even a decade ago, when we were putting things out to bid, when we were really thought we were moving down a process, we would get one bid on things, maybe two. And if you then have all the different regions trying to sort of fulfill this vision that gets created, how concerned are you about that workforce issue as a bottleneck?
I think you've identified a serious concern. Yeah, not only just from constructability, but also from the architects and engineers that have to do all these detailed facilities assessments. So I think that's a really great point, and I think it is a concern. I guess if it would be wonderful, but who knows how realistic it is, if we could somewhat get an idea of projected school construction funding capability over an extended period of time, it may be the information that contractors are looking for to say, okay, maybe we should reopen that office in Vermont because now there's going to be school construction funding available, right? And I think, I don't know how to address the problem, but the only way that I know that would be contributing to something we could market or advertise is putting out there, what is our foreseeable construction funding for the next 10 years? And if we can have an idea of that, whatever the state can put towards school construction funding, it's an interesting discussion to me. What's the tipping point for school districts that says an 80-20 split is good for them? And going forward, a 70-30 split. What is the amount of state aid required to get school construction bonds to pass? And then knowing that kind of roughly, if we could somehow get that data, what amount can the state fund? That gives us an idea of how many schools a year we can build. And then that gives us kind of an idea of what would that be in terms of demand on construction companies and architectural engineering firms. And I think that kind of information could be helpful.
This is another sort of slightly different topic. Do you think that there is a role for temporary buildings in certain areas? So we've gone that route in one of the school districts that I represent because we were told by our demographer that there's going to be this peak of a number of students in your elementary schools, and that's probably not going to be sustained over the long term. But there really is a crisis because there just isn't space for all the kids that you have right now. And so we put up modular buildings that look great and, function like regular classrooms, but they're not meant to last, 60, 70 years like the current buildings that we're in right now. Do you think that there's a role for that in the state as we kind of watch where these demographic trends are going, or is that a waste of money to go out and be putting up temporary buildings?
Yeah, I don't think I'll characterize whether it's a waste or not, but I do think that temporary has a very clear definition when you're talking about life safety requirements. So a building, if it's in position more than a certain number of days, then you have to fire sprinkler it. You may have to put fire smoke detection and fire alarm system in it. And so what is temporary in terms of the idea of the school district may not be temporary in terms of the construction requirements of added life safety requirements. So now you're talking about, because we were talking about this with North Country when we were talking about what to do with the PCBs, and we were looking at putting modular trailers in the parking lot just to run the fire protection services out to that. That requires taking a look at, do you have enough water supply from the municipality to even take on the additional sprinkler protection? And so what seems relatively easy, just put in a trailer, just put in a modular, now turns into, wow, I have to do an engineering study to make sure that I have enough electrical capacity to hook up these remote trailers, do I have enough water capacity for the domestic water? Do I have enough water capacity for the fire protection? And then how do you do the freeze protection for all those pipes going up to these trailers that have to pop up into the ambient air to get into it, right? So there's all these details that start to muddy the water when it comes to the decision making, because each one of them has a dollar price associated with it that escalates the cost. And then you say, should I be investing all of this facility infrastructure for support and life safety in a modular when I could be doing it into a permanent building? I'm not saying right or wrong or indifferent. Everybody has to respond to the crisis they're dealing with. And at some cases, temporary structures make sense. They make a lot of sense. But when temporary turns into permanent, there are cost ramifications to that.
Yeah, Representative Muslim.
Yeah, thank you. Briefly, I hope, Representative Holcomb's comment back a few minutes ago about public buildings for what we preparing for, we have now, what we want down the line, I think, summarizes a lot of the thoughts in this committee, even if we haven't exactly articulated them, because clearly there will, if we go BOCES or consolidation or whatever, they're going to be likely some profound changes, even if they don't happen right away. They'll be incremental, and we need to be adept at, and I think you said agile or some comment like that, on how we get from here to there, and that's going to affect very greatly sequence of construction, reconstruction, and comments I can offer later that are not particularly relevant to this discussion right now about where the money comes from and how we get there. So I should just be quiet and just offer those as situations that we have right in front of us, even if some of them are not articulated very clearly.
You know, one additional thing we need to talk about, well, we don't need to, but I think it's wise to, is when school districts start to go through the process of trying to decide, does it make sense to keep all the school buildings operating? And then when they try to decide what school buildings to invest in from a construction standpoint,
right?
If PCBs are in the buildings that make the most sense to keep because of the attributes of the building, how does that factor in to choosing that building because it educationally makes sense, but from an environmental contaminant does not necessarily make sense if the remediation and abatement doesn't result in a solution in reduction of the PCBs? So I think as we talk about school construction going forward, PCBs must be part of the discussion, not theoretically, but what is the real world dollar impact and its impact on making a good decision for investing state dollars in a solution that may not prove to be satisfactory, and yet now we've invested a lot of money, right? So every school construction program that's touching a building that may have PCBs has to have a cost adder just for the unknown of the PCBs. And if a school district's tasked with looking at 4 or 5 elementary schools and which one to close, they can't just look at it necessarily from it has the right square footage, has the right service spaces, it has a big enough parking lot to move more kids and more teachers and aides over to it. They also have to say which one of these is a potential brownfield site because it's PCBs. You know, so I think that's really important, and I think we have to go from the theoretical to the practical on what it means for districts to actually deal with that kind of problem.
Anyone else? Yeah, Representative Holcomb.
And just one other thought, as somebody who was in a district that was building at the peak of our population, we are now, I don't know if it's the oldest or the second oldest state in the country, but we won't be forever. And I think the challenge of any major governmental entity is that you have to plan not just for today, but you have to plan for 20 years out. And our demographics are going to shift, and what decisions we make today will have an impact on how that shift happens.
I think we're in a political moment nationally where it's very hard to make plans for what our demographic future will be.
Do you think?
Yeah.
Right.
Bob, anything else that you'd like to share with us?
No, I think
Okay.
you guys have a very difficult problem to deal with, and I admire how
Thanks, Bob.
you keep trying it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming in and giving testimony year after year. We're gonna find our way through this together. Take care and
Absolutely.
thanks for your time.
All right, bye all.
Folks, we are going to the floor and then tomorrow, yep, the day's still not over. And then tomorrow, extraordinary, isn't it?
But like the way you think, Charlie.
And then tomorrow, can I just finish my sentences, please? Tomorrow morning, we are picking up the childcare contribution tax. Not getting like into the weeds we were in today, just looking at like the health of the overall fund and how money is going into it and out of it. And then some more after that. We do have a joint hearing at 10:30 tomorrow in room 11. So as you're thinking about your day, know that half of it will be spent downstairs. See you tomorrow.